Hi all, we are going to be discussing Vietnam War today. Big picture things, foreign policy, impacts it had, right? Big war strategies, maybe what happened to executive power because of Vietnam War. So big picture things, not really looking at small battles, anything like that. The war dragged on for a while. So again, we're going to be focusing on bigger picture here, on the bigger picture. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to give you some background on Vietnam before we get started so that you understand what is happening here. Okay, so prior to the Vietnam War, Vietnam is technically Indochina, right? It is colonized by the French. As they are trying to gain independence from France, this is where the rift starts. We have North Vietnam, who wants to declare itself a communist country, led by Ho Chi Minh. And then you have Southern Vietnam that's like, no, we're going to go the democratic capitalist way, right? Led by Diem. So this is basically the start of the issue. The other thing that I did want to point out is that if you don't know, Vietnam currently today is a unified country, right? Okay, so let's get more into what is happening there. Okay, so the war starts in 1959. Kennedy comes into office in 1960. Kennedy did not really want to get involved, right? He said, it's their war, let's not get involved. Unfortunately, we know that Kennedy is assassinated in 1963. So we have Lyndon B. Johnson who replaces Kennedy. And Johnson does want to get involved. Johnson basically, is saying, I don't want Vietnam to go the way China did, right? He believed in this domino theory that if China fell, then Vietnam's going to fall, and, or Korea was going to fall too, all the trickle-down effect of all these countries, and they were all eventually going to end up communist countries. So he said, I will get involved. He follows a policy of gradual escalation, and basically what this meant was, let's send, a couple troops. Let's see how many troops are needed there. If that is not enough, then we'll send more, and then we'll send more, and then we'll send more. But that's kind of a difficult way to win because you're not sending, a massive force. But also the other thing is at this point, the U.S. is not fully involved yet, right? They are supporting Vietnam with weapons, supplies, with troops, but they are not doing a ton of fighting yet. Okay, so the other person I want to bring up on the slide, he is not on here, but someone you should know about is Robert McNamara. He was a Secretary of Defense at this point, and he is going to have a big influence over LBJ and why he eventually does declare war on Vietnam. McNamara is considered a hawk, and he definitely pushed for war, right? If you don't know what a hawk means, it's just people, it's the hawk and dove reference. Hawks are more, yes, let's go for war. Doves are like, no, let's not go to war, right? Peace. Okay. The other thing too, if I didn't say this in the beginning that you should know, the war eventually is a loss, right, for the United States because Vietnam today is considered a communist country. So in case you hadn't already put that in your notes, you need to write that down. Okay, so moving on, one of the big impacts here with the Vietnam War is the expansion of presidential powers, right? So let's talk about how this happened with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964. Okay, as I said, Johnson had made it a priority to stop the spread of communism, right? The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution gave broad congressional approval for expansion of the Vietnam War, and with this Tonkin Resolution, the U.S. is going to fully launch, their involvement in the war. Let's talk about who has the power, though, to kind of declare war, right? So according to the Constitution, the president controls the military, but technically Congress has to officially declare war in any war, right? But in Vietnam, there technically wasn't an official declaration, rather a gradual escalation of military. And eventually the president just kind of fully wanted to get involved after this torpedo situation, which I'll let you know what happened in a second. And so the executive branch, in this case Johnson, the president, kind of expands his powers, right? So what was happening here was in North Vietnam, torpedo boats attacked 2 U.S. destroyers in this area. And so the U.S. took that as an opportunity to say, oh yeah, they attacked us, we need to retaliate, kind of thing, right? So they needed a reason to rally troops and people. So this is kind of when it escalates, 1, into a full war, and 2, again, it's going to give the executive branch, Johnson, more power here with this Tonkin Resolution. So that's a big thing here that comes out of this war. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the military strategy here. We'll start with Viet Cong. So this is North Vietnam, right? Or the people supporting North Vietnam. Okay. So they were all about guerrilla warfare, attack and retreat, right? The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. The conventional army loses if he does not win. Okay, so Viet Cong are all aided by North Vietnam. The big problem here was that a lot of them were hiding within the civilian population. And as you know, one of the war tactics, one of the war rules is that you don't attack civilians. Even though we had already seen some of that with, or in World War II with the droppings of the atomic bombs. But now in Vietnam, this is also going to totally be a rule that's going to be disregarded because a lot of the Viet Cong, aka they were also known as Charlie, by the way. So if you hear the word Charlie, they were referring to the Viet Cong. They would go into South Vietnam and basically hide with civilians. And so this made it very, very hard, you know, to find who these Viet Cong were. Okay, another unique thing about the war here in Vietnam is that a lot of it is being done in the jungle, right? Because Vietnam has a lot of jungle in it. So we're going to talk about these booby-trapping jungles, or not talk about really, but I'm going to show you a picture of what they look like. But this made it very hard for American spotter planes to find the Viet Cong, right? The Charlie troops, or the Charlie enemies, sorry. So let me show you what it looked like, and then I'll talk about some of the strategy for the U.S. Okay, so you can kind of see what it looked like. So these underground tunnels, from what I've heard, you can go to parts of Vietnam and still see what they look like. It's pretty crazy to see. I've not seen them. I was in Vietnam, but unfortunately did not see them. All right, let's talk about U.S. military strategy. So the U.S. military strategy was this Operation Rolling Thunder. It was basically a 3-year campaign of just bombing, right? And they were trying to bomb strategic places such as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And this was because this is where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was used by Northern Vietnam, right, to get down to South Vietnam with troops, supplies, and everything they needed. This whole idea behind the massive bombardment was to put military pressure, right, on North Vietnam. So I'm going to show you some numbers here about the gradual escalation, because I told you this was the whole idea behind Lyndon B. Johnson's strategy. Okay, so as you can see, 1965, 184 troops are sent. 1966, 385. 1967, 485. 1968, 538,000. The problem with this is that there is no clear measure of success. And anytime, you know, people were asking, how are we doing with the war? There was never no definite answer as to, yes, you know, we're doing great, like the U.S. is winning, nothing like that. And I'll explain why that became a problem later on in the slideshow. Let's see. Let's talk about the search and destroy raids, or SIPA raids. So the whole idea behind this was to insert ground forces into hostile territory, search out the enemy, destroy them, and withdraw immediately after. The strategy was the result of a new technology, the helicopter. It resulted in a new form of warfare, right? They're trying to find the Charlie, the Viet Cong in the jungle. The problem is that it's going to cost a lot of lives, not only American servicemen, but also a lot of civilians, a lot of innocent people here. Because what was happening is let's talk about the two different non-conventional methods that were being used, but also some of the SIPO rates and what that was about. So there were two different things that were used during these SIPO raids that left many not only dead, but also it's going to have long-term effects on some of these troops. So napalm was used, and that was a flammable liquid used to drive Viet Cong out of their tunnels. Like I said, it hurt civilians. Agent Orange was a chemical used to destroy jungle foliage and expose the Viet Cong, but caused cancer, disease, and other diseases. Later on, once the troops start coming back home, they're going to see some of these long-term effects of having used the napalm and the Agent Orange. A lot of them developed cancer, other diseases. A lot of them, it prevented them from reproducing, right? So a lot of men became sterile because of this. Yes, the SIPO rates was a tactic to burn down villages, right? To basically to drive the Viet Cong out of the tunnels. Oftentimes, though, as I said, because the Viet Cong was hidden within the civilian population or lived with certain civilians, right, that were innocent, they would just burn down the entire village, and many innocent people ended up dying. Okay, so what is going on in the home front? Now, initially, Americans were in full support of the war, right? Because, again, it's still the Cold War, the Red Scare. People in the U.S. do not want to see other countries fall into communism. They want to prevent the further spread of communism. So initially, things are looking good. They're supporting the war. But as the war continues and they keep sending more and more men with this gradual escalation theory, it's going to start claiming more lives, right? So people are going to start questioning what is actually happening. So you're going to see a lot of people now turning into more doves, right? They want this peace. They don't want war anymore. And the other big thing is that this war is costing a lot of money. So a lot of the money that is supposed to be with LBJ, remember the Great Society that we were talking about, all the programs, it's going to siphon money out of that. So a lot of the money that was supposed to be put into these programs for the Great Society is now being used for the Vietnam War. And people are like, well, we don't see any progress, right, with the war. So this is why people start to turn. There were also issues with drafting because the draft did, not the draft, but they were drafting poor Americans on a larger scale. So the poor were 2 times more likely to be drafted. If you were a college student at this time, you could defer your draft, or defer to be drafted. But the problem here was that most people who attended college in the 1960s, were the wealthier people. That's why it became a poor people's war. Also, minorities were more likely to be drafted than whites. And then the other thing that happens here is the 26th Amendment is going to be added to the Constitution. So in case you don't know what the 26th Amendment is, it lowers the voting age because it used to be that you had to be 21 to vote. And so people were like, okay, how can we go to war and die at 18, but we have to wait to be 21, to vote. So the 26th Amendment is passed in 1971. And the last two things you see here are just chants that were very, very famous during this time, that people that were out protesting, hell no, we won't go, and hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Okay, so Vietnam's going to become the first TV war, right? What this means is just that people could now sit at home, turn on their TV, and actually see what was happening. So they see how bad things are in Vietnam. They see the fighting. They see the men dying. So when they don't see progress and they see more of their fathers, their brothers, their husbands, boyfriends, sons, being sent to Vietnam without any progress, they're going to start to question this, even though you have official government or government officials saying otherwise. You know, they're saying, oh no, things are going good. But people are like, no, that doesn't seem like it based on what we're watching, right? So the TV really did capture the reality of Vietnam, and this is why more and more people start to turn against the war. Also, in case you didn't notice, yes, the sign says drop acid, not bombs. This is during the time of the hippie movement too. So yes, that is acid as in drugs, but no, do not drop acid. All right, once soldiers do come home, start returning home, there's a lot of PTSD that comes with it, a lot of other issues, psychological, physical issues, right? So for the first time, we see soldiers returning with amputated limbs, right? Because prior to this, most soldiers who did lose a limb during war ended up dying because we did not have the antibiotics that were needed at the time, right? But with medicine and technological advances, now you're able to amputate a limb instead of like the whole person dying, right? So you start to see a lot of soldiers coming back with without limbs. Disillusionment came because people were like, we were out there, or not people, sorry, the troops were out there fighting, but fighting for what? Because like I said, in the end, Vietnam it turned to be a communist country, right? So this was not a win for the US. I told you about some of the issues with Agent Orange, right? A lot of the men who ended up developing cancer or became sterile or other diseases. PTSD and shell shock is just a very common problem with troops in all the different wars, so that still happened here. And then the other thing was that a lot of them became targets of anti-war protests, you know, even though it wasn't their fault that they went, right? It was like you had to be drafted. A lot of the anti-war protesters did end up attacking, some verbally, some physically, a lot of these troops. Okay. We are going to move on to Richard Nixon now because the Vietnam War is going to last through different presidents, right? And we're going to start moving on to some of the crimes of Richard Nixon here, but we'll start with a big scandal that breaks out in 1971. And this was, this scandal was known as the Pentagon Papers. So the Pentagon Papers are going to expose some of the reality of Vietnam and how a lot of the big top government officials, including presidents, actually knew how bad things were really going in Vietnam, but they kept lying to the public, right? So this is all going to get exposed. You've probably maybe seen the movie, I don't know. But if you haven't, you're going to read about it today, learn about it with the Pentagon Papers here. So former defense analyst Daniel Ellsberg is the one who's going to leak the government documents to the New York Times and to the Boston, what is the Boston paper called? I can't remember now. Anyway, 2 different newspapers. And basically the whole idea behind this is that the government misled Congress and public about Vietnam. The primary reason was to avoid defeat and to stop communism. Or sorry, the primary reason was to avoid defeat, not necessarily to stop communism. So at this time when all these papers get exposed, and it's like a big report, it's like pages and pages of just information, people are going to really start to question the government, right? So the government credibility is going, like there is no government credibility at this time. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to let you read the Pentagon Papers, and we're going to discuss this, and we'll keep talking about Nixon because the last couple of slides on this PowerPoint are about the crimes of Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon, interesting character, wants to ensure his reelection because, as you remember, or I don't know if we did talk about this. The election of 1960 was between JFK and Richard Nixon. Remember, Richard Nixon loses, like barely loses, right? He ends up coming back, wins, not right away, obviously we have LBJ, but Richard Nixon comes back and he wins, and now he's trying to ensure that he wins re-election. And he's not a very confident man, so he's doing all these things to ensure that he does get reelected for the second time. But not before he's exposed with all these different cases that came out of things he was doing that were pretty shady. The biggest one being the Watergate break-in, which is the one we are going to talk about as well. So that's it for Vietnam War. Those are the big things to take away.